MMA is probably one of the most hyped sports out there, but it's the women's fights that really take it up a notch. And even out of them, Valentina Shevchenko takes it up a notch. Here are some of her best knockouts, starting with Valentina Shevchenko versus Jessica Andrade.
She's got such a beautiful check hook off the right hand as well. She showed that in the Hollywood. Beautiful throw there. My goodness.
You can't go wrong with any fight that the fighter has been a part of. No matter what, she always finds a way to turn it into something truly incredible. But the time she went up against Andrade was so much better than most of what you see in the UFC, even today. At the time, she was the women's flyweight champion at the UFC, and her opponent was none other than the strawweight champion herself. All of that was taking place at UFC 261 in Florida. In fact, it was almost right after pandemic restrictions were lifted, and the first time in a while that the place was full of fans. Before the fight started, though, everyone thought that Valentina, or the Bullet, was going to have a rough one, which makes sense, since Andrade is just as good. Not just that, but her skills with wrestling are on another level as well. Despite all of that, the entire match was dominated by none other than the Bullet. All it took was 2 rounds for the fighter to completely destroy her opponent. In fact, she played Andrade's own game with her and ended up knocking her opponent out in just the second round. That too with an incredible elbow.
Like she opened her up with one of those elbows.
Big damage.
Stoppage could come here.
Closely. As it should be. That's it.
And still, the UFC flyweight champion. Is there anyone?
It was pretty clear that the Bullet isn't someone you want to mess around with. Not just that, but this is the very same fight that led to her defending her title for the 5th time in a row. It's pretty obvious why this one ended up on this list. Another fight that's an obvious pick is Valentina Shevchenko versus Jessica Eye.
Defense of her title. Clearly, Eye in outstanding shape, barely breathing heavy after round 1.
Oh, she ate that one hard. I mean, that sounds like someone is slapping the bag with a baseball bat.
If I'm talking about her 5th defense for the title, I absolutely have to talk about her first defense for it.
And still, the undisputed UFC flyweight champion of the world, Valentina.
Not a single person has been able to forget about the fight with Eye. The Bullet didn't fail to live up to her name. This one took place in UFC 238 and is relatively recent, taking place in 2019. Once again, all it took was 2 rounds for her to show her opponent who the real boss was. Things seemed pretty at the start of the fight, even though Eye rushed in with super aggressive attempts, basically trying to get the most out of the first round.
Blue Valentina Shevchenko in the black and gold, befitting a champion.
Right away, hard kick to the body. And that southpaw stance really opens up that back power kick of Valentina's. There it is again.
But all of those attempts meant nothing against the devastating body kicks that Valentina had in store for her. Not just that, but she even went for a takedown and set the tone for how the rest of the fight would go. Though that wasn't the end of it, she then let her opponent get back on her feet and try again. In the second round, things really went up a notch. It was almost as if Valentina was just toying with her opponent. She probably got really bored of that after a bit and ended the fight with a breathtaking head kick and knocked the air out of Eye, thus winning the fight with one of the best knockouts ever.
It's like someone is slapping the bag with a baseball bat.
Yeah, it's bad.
Oh, head kick, it's it.
The women's card really does bring you the best fights. On the other hand, you've got Valentina Shevchenko versus Irina Mazeppa. This one goes back all the way to 2013. It was actually a fight for the title at an event in China called Kunlun Fight 9 Legend of Mulan. Fans expected that the event's final and main fight would go on longer and give them the satisfaction they wanted, but they could not have been more wrong. All it took for the fighter was a single round this time. From the start, she had Mazeppa up in the corner and was already panicking. That is before the Bullet threw her opponent a deadly kick to the head and things started to go in her favor. She even taunted her as she waited for her to get back up. Turns out that wasn't happening for sure, ending up in her winning through a knockout. There's really no one in that entire tournament that deserved the title more than her, and this fight is just proof of that. Not just that, but it just goes to show just how good she is at the sport. This was the same fight that started out the legend of Valentina Shevchenko. But I can't just forget about her fight against Neris Ringo. Rincon. One thing that you must never forget about the Bullet is that she's a multi-sport fighter, though this one goes back all the way to 2011, and that too in Peru. She was up against none other than Rincon and won that fight with style, though this one did drag on for a bit, unlike some of the other fights on this list. Rincon was giving Valentina one of the toughest fights she's ever had, or at least that's what fans thought in the first 2 rounds. Things suddenly swept in her favor in the 3rd round when she sent her opponent flying to the canvas a bunch of times. But it was the 4th round in which the fighter actually won. During the entire fight, she fought in pretty much the same way as she did in her first professional fight ever. By that I mean she largely relied on a kickboxing stance with a mix of Muay Thai grappling. Rincon tried her best to fight against that, but no matter what she did, it was all unsuccessful. All in all, it just goes to show just how incredibly skilled she is at what she does. I mean, she just punched her in the head until her opponent got knocked out. She was clearly out for blood. While that may be ferocious, it's nothing compared to Valentina Shevchenko versus Caitlin Chukachin.
Pro sports quite like the tension of a UFC championship fight.
This is why the odds makers had her a 14-1 favorite.
This one is just another example of a fighter trying her best to get the title from Valentina, but failing. Failing in a pretty bad way, as a matter of fact. The Bullet was defending her title as the flyweight champion for the 3rd time. The fighter was already working on cutting down her opponent's defense from the moment the fight started.
The range completely now. And this is where it starts to get tough for the ladies who fight Shevchenko. When she gets her rhythm and her timing, and she starts landing her takedowns too, now she has the fight and she has the momentum.
That continued on to the 3rd round. All the while, the fight was in her favor and she was still testing the water out. But here's where things took a really intense turn in typical Valentina fashion. The fighter ended up battering Chukachin on her feet at the 1 minute and 5 second mark.
Favorite. I mean, this is what this
Oh,
my goodness.
Shade, that one.
Oh my goodness.
That was perfect.
She's axe
Axe
kicking
kick
her now.
Under 2 minutes in the round, all Shevchenko.
And then continued punching her until she couldn't take it anymore, and the referee had to step in to stop her.
Easily could be the end of the fight here, and it may very well be.
Oh, that's it.
That's it.
And still the best in the world by a mile, Valentina Shevchenko.
She did an incredible job at reminding everyone why no one should mess with her. Not just that, but it made every other fighter in the division even more terrified of her. And finally, I have to talk about her fight against Milena Munoz. I had to end this video with at least one throwback to the super aggressive and out for blood days of the fighter's career. Admittedly, she has cooled down a lot in recent years, but mainly because there's just no one that's as good as her. With that said, her opponent was right on the edge, already completely destroyed by Valentina, and just searching for a way to survive. That's right, when the fighter hit her opponent with a roundhouse kick to her body and knocked her out. She was actually about to follow it up with another kick to the head, but stopped herself in between that. I mean, she obviously didn't actually want to kill her. These are some of the best knockouts by Valentina Shevchenko. See you in the next video.